He tried to sit up, expecting the familiar rattle in his chest, the weakness that had plagued him for months. But he moved with a fluid, terrifying power. His lungs filled deep and effortless. He raised a hand to his face. The skin was smooth, sun-kissed, glowing with vitality. These were not the hands of a sickly schoolteacher. These were not the hands of Paul Amadeus Dienach. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his gut. He looked around the room. There were no corners. Everything curved, organic and glass-like, revealing a skyline that defied gravity. Towers of crystal pierced a violet sky, connected by shimmering bridges of light. Below, silence. No clip-clop of horse hooves, no roar of early automobiles, just a harmonious, humming silence. A figure approached him. A human, yet more. Taller. Perfect symmetry. The being spoke, but the words were a melodic stream of vowels he couldn't grasp. They looked at him not with fear, but with a profound, pitying recognition. They held up a reflective surface. Paul stared into the glass. The face staring back was a stranger, sharp jawline, intense eyes, a man named Andreas Northam. He closed his eyes, praying to wake up in his bed in Geneva, praying for the smell of old paper and rain. But when he opened them again, the crystal towers remained. The date flashed on a panel near the bed, transcribed in a script he somehow instantly understood. It was not 1921, it was the year 3906. He had simply gone to sleep. And in the space of a single breath, he had crossed an ocean of time to witness the destiny of mankind. But the most terrifying part wasn't the future. It was the knowledge that eventually he would have to go back. This sounds like fiction, a meticulously crafted sci-fi epic written by a master of the genre. But it isn't. The story we are uncovering today does not come from the mind of a novelist. It comes from the tattered, handwritten pages of a diary that was never meant to be read. A diary written by a humble, dying man in the early 20th century who claimed to have lived a year in the distant future while his physical body lay in a coma in a Geneva hospital. The man was Paul Amadeus Dienach. He was not a celebrity. He was not a mystic. He was a quiet, German-speaking teacher living in Switzerland, suffering from a delicate heart and a fragile constitution. In 1921, Paul fell victim to a mysterious epidemic sweeping the globe, Encephalitis Lethargica. The sleepy sickness. Victims would fall into a state of suspended animation, statue-like, trapped in their own bodies. Some never woke up. Paul did. But when he woke up a year later, he was changed. He was haunted. He spoke of a civilization called the Valley of the Roses. He spoke of the chronicles of the future. He stopped teaching. He isolated himself, frantically writing day and night, translating memories that felt more real to him than the gray streets of the 1920s. He entrusted these writings to a single student, Georgios Papachotsis, with a strict instruction: burn this, or keep it hidden, but do not publish it until long after I am gone. Why? Because Paul knew the world wasn't ready. He knew that what he saw in the year 3906 would shatter the religious, scientific, and philosophical foundations of the 20th century. But before we open the diary, I have a question for you. Do you believe consciousness is bound to a single time, or can it travel freely across centuries? Answer yes or no in the comments right now. Go ahead. I'll wait. Because if you answer yes, you might just be ready to hear what Paul Amadeus Dienach brought back from the abyss of time. Subscribe now to explore the boundaries of reality. We are about to read the forbidden words of the man who cheated time. Let's turn the page. Geneva, 1921. The world was still bleeding. The Great War had ended only a few years prior, leaving Europe scarred, bankrupt, and broken. In the quiet corners of Switzerland, Paul Amadeus Dienach was fighting his own private war. He was a man hollowed out by grief. The love of his life was gone, and his health was crumbling. He was a teacher of German and French, a man of letters, but his body was failing him. He had been diagnosed with encephalitis lethargica, the sleepy sickness. It was a terrifying plague that swept through the early 20th century like a phantom. It didn't kill you with violence, it simply turned you off. It trapped you in a prison of bone and silence. One afternoon, the exhaustion became absolute. It wasn't just tired, it was a heaviness that seemed to pull his very soul toward the floor. The chalk dropped from his hand. The classroom blurred. The sounds of his students faded into a distant, underwater murmur. Paul collapsed. When the doctors examined him at the hospital in Geneva, they shook their heads. His pulse was faint, a mere whisper of life. His eyes were closed, his limbs rigid. For all intents and purposes, Paul Dienach was gone. He lay in that hospital bed, a living statue, for one entire year. To the nurses changing his sheets, he was just another victim of the epidemic. A tragedy, a body waiting to expire. But Paul was not there. The transition was not like falling asleep. It was a violent dislocation, a sensation of being pulled through the eye of a needle. The darkness wasn't empty, it was heavy, pressurized. He felt the tether of his identity snapping, the cord binding him to 1921 severing with a psychic crack. Then, light. Blinding, impossible light. He gasped, his chest heaving with a strength he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't the shallow, rasping breath of a dying man. This was a powerful, deep inhalation that expanded his ribs. He sat up. The room was circular, walls glowing with a soft, amber phosphorescence. There were no windows, yet the room was filled with the sensation of fresh air and sunlight. He looked down at his hands. They were large, strong. The veins were prominent, the skin olive-toned and vibrant. He touched his chest. Hard muscle. He tried to speak. He intended to ask, "Where am I?" in German. But the words that left his mouth were strange. The vowels were rounder, the consonants softer. He was speaking, but he wasn't controlling the language. It was muscle memory, a reflex. A man stood by the bedside. He wore a tunic of a material that shimmered like woven mercury. His face was kind, possessed of a terrifyingly intelligent symmetry. This was the physician, a man Paul would later come to know as Stefan. Stefan placed a hand on Paul's shoulder. The touch was warm, grounding. He spoke. Paul didn't understand the words, but he felt the intent. Calm, return, safety. Paul panicked. He scrambled backward on the bed, his heart hammering. Not a flutter, but a powerful rhythmic drum. He screamed in French, "Who are you? Where is the hospital?" The physician frowned, tilting his head. He turned to a console floating in midair, a panel of light that responded to the wave of a hand. He tapped a sequence, and a soft melody filled the room. It instantly lowered Paul's heart rate. It wasn't magic. It was technology so advanced it manipulated biology directly. They brought him a mirror. Paul braced himself. He expected to see his own pale, gaunt face, ravished by the sleeping sickness. He saw a stranger. The man in the mirror was in his mid-40s, handsome, with a sharp nose and eyes that held a lifetime of memories Paul did not possess. He touched his cheek. The stranger in the mirror touched his cheek. He was trapped, a squatter in another man's vessel. The realization broke him. He wept, but even his tears felt different, hotter, heavier. The doctors watched him with clinical fascination. To them, this was Andreas Northam. Andreas had been involved in a serious accident. He had been suspended for a brief time. They expected him to wake up disoriented. They did not expect him to wake up with the soul of a 20th century schoolteacher. Days passed, or what Paul assumed were days. The concept of time in this place was fluid. There was no night, only a dimming of the ambient light, a collective rest period for the city. Slowly, the panic subsided, replaced by a voracious curiosity. Paul realized he had access to Andreas Northam's basic motor skills and language centers, but none of his personal memories. It was like inheriting a fully furnished house but having no keys to the drawers. He learned that he was in Molson, a region of southern Europe, but the Europe he knew was gone. The borders of Switzerland, Italy, and Germany had been erased millennia ago. He began to ask questions, broken, childlike questions. "What year?" he asked Stefan one morning, pointing to the shifting sky outside, where vehicles moved without sound or exhaust. Stefan looked at him, his expression grave. He traced the numbers in the air, a holographic projection. 3906. Paul stared at the numbers. 1921 was dust. Everyone he ever loved, his parents, his students, the woman who broke his heart, they had been dead for nearly 2,000 years. Their bones were dirt. Their names were forgotten. Even the stone buildings of Geneva would have eroded to sand. He was a ghost, an anomaly. Stefan and the other physicians, realizing that Andreas was suffering from a profound displacement, decided to help him. They didn't lock him in an asylum. They didn't treat him as a madman. In the 40th century, the understanding of consciousness had evolved. They recognized that while the body was Andreas, the pilot was elsewhere. They called it a consciousness slide, a rare, almost mythical phenomenon where a soul from the past, untethered by trauma or coma, drifts downstream into a receptive vessel in the future. Paul Dienach, the sickly teacher, was the first man in history to drift 2,000 years downstream and survive the current. To help him acclimate, they didn't force him to work or remember Andreas's life. Instead, they did something extraordinary. They gave him a history lesson. They brought him the Chronicles. Imagine waking up in ancient Rome and trying to explain the internet. Now, reverse it. Paul was a man of the age of steam engines and telegrams, trying to comprehend a world where humanity had conquered death, war, and scarcity. He learned that the 20th and 21st centuries were known as the age of prehistory. They were viewed as dark, barbaric times. The people of 3906 looked back on the 1900s with a mixture of horror and pity. They called it the era of natural selection, where humans killed each other for resources, governed by greed and fear. Paul sat on the terrace of the hospital overlooking the crystal spires of Molson, weeping for his own time. He wept for the brutality of the world he left behind. But he also felt a strange, expanding hope. Because humanity had survived, we didn't destroy ourselves. We didn't burn the atmosphere. We didn't nuke the planet into oblivion. We made it. We grew up. But the journey from 1921 to 3906 was not a straight line. As Paul opened the Chronicles, he read about the nightmares that lay between his time and theirs. He read about the wars of the 21st century, the collapse, the years of the Great Pain. He realized with a chilling certainty that he was reading the obituary of his own civilization. He was reading the future history of the children he used to teach. And he knew, deep in the borrowed gut of Andreas Northam, that he had to remember every single word. Because he suspected, with a terrifying intuition, that this ticket wasn't one way. The universe demands balance. Eventually, Andreas Northam would want his body back, and Paul Dienach would have to go home. Paul spent his days in the library of Molson. It wasn't a library of books, but of light. He would sit in a reclined chair, place a metallic band across his forehead, and history would flood into his mind. Not as words on a page, but as memories. He experienced the history of the world. He learned that the 20th century, his century, was just the beginning of the age of numbers. That's what they called it. The era where human worth was measured in digits, bank accounts, GDP, casualties. He saw the timeline stretch out before him, and it was terrifying. He saw the 21st century. He saw the wars over water and oil. He saw the skies turn gray with neglect. He saw a period called the Great Pain. It wasn't a single event, but a slow, suffocating collapse. overpopulation, resource exhaustion, a time when humanity nearly cannibalized itself in a desperate scramble for survival. Paul trembled as he absorbed these images. He wanted to rip the headset off. He wanted to scream across time to the leaders of 1921, to warn them, to beg them to change course. But Stefan, who often sat with him, would gently shake his head. "You cannot change the river, Paul," Stefan said, his voice resonating with a sad wisdom. "The river must flow." Humanity had to break its bones to learn how to heal them. We had to almost die to learn how to live. This was the hardest lesson: acceptance. As the months in the future turned into a year, Paul began to understand the society of 3906. They had transcended the age of numbers. They had entered the age of the rose. There was no money. The concept was laughable to them, archaic as trading seashells. Work was voluntary, a form of creative expression. If you wanted a house, you built it with the community. If you needed food, it was provided. Technology had solved the problem of scarcity centuries ago. But they didn't just sit around in idleness. They worked on the only thing that mattered left: the self. They spent their days in introspection, in artistic pursuit, in understanding the architecture of the soul. They had proven scientifically that consciousness was not a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental field of the universe, like gravity. They didn't just believe in the spirit, they studied it. They mapped it. Paul felt a profound envy. He was a man of the old world, a man of anxiety and fear. He felt like a Neanderthal invited to a dinner party of gods. He was clumsy, rough, mentally noisy. Yet they treated him with reverence. To them, he was an archaeological miracle, a living window into the dark ages. One afternoon, Stefan took Paul to a balcony overlooking the city. The sky was a tapestry of violet and gold. "Your time is ending, Paul," Stefan said softly. Paul froze. He had pushed the thought away, buried it deep under the wonders of this new world. "What do you mean?" "The vessel, Andreas. He is returning," Stefan explained. "His consciousness is reassembling. The slide is reversing. You are being pulled back." "I don't want to go back," Paul whispered. The panic returned, sharp and immediate. "I am dying back there. My body is broken. I am a sick man in a sick world. Please, let me stay." Stefan looked at him with infinite compassion. "You cannot stay. A soul cannot occupy a vessel that is not its own forever. It violates the laws of nature. But listen to me, Paul. You are not going back empty-handed." Stefan pointed to Paul's head. "You carry the chronicles. You have seen the destination. You know that no matter how dark the night gets, the sun does rise. Humanity makes it. We survive. We evolve. You must take that hope back to the 20th century. The sensation started that night. It began as a vibration in his extremities. The solid, healthy body of Andreas Northam began to feel alien. His vision blurred. The crystal towers of Molson started to lose their solidity, turning into streaks of light. He tried to fight it. He grabbed the sheets of his bed, digging his fingers into the fabric, anchoring himself to the year 3906. He screamed Stefan's name, but the pull was inexorable. It was like falling backward down a well. The light of the future faded. The harmonious hum of the city was replaced by a high-pitched ringing. The smell of ozone and flowers vanished, replaced by the sharp, antiseptic sting of rubbing alcohol. Darkness. Absolute, suffocating darkness. Then, pain. Every joint in his body screamed. His lungs felt like they were filled with wet sand. He tried to take a deep breath like he had done in Andreas's body, but he could only manage a weak, rattling wheeze. He opened his eyes. Gray. Everything was gray. The cracked plaster of a ceiling. The dull light of a Geneva afternoon filtering through a dirty window. The sound of a distant trolley car. He was back. He was Paul Amadeus Dienach again. The strong jawline was gone. The vitality was gone. He was a fragile 36-year-old man waking up from a year-long coma. A nurse dropped a tray of metal instruments. The clatter was deafening. She ran out of the room shouting for a doctor. "He's awake! The teacher is awake!" Paul lay there, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of joy for survival, but tears of devastating loss. He had been expelled from paradise. He had tasted the nectar of the gods, only to be cast back into the mud. But then he remembered Stefan's words. "You carry the chronicles." His mind was reeling. The memories of 3906 were already beginning to fade, dreamlike, evaporating like mist under the morning sun. He knew he had hours, maybe days, before the details blurred into nonsense. He needed paper. He needed a pen. When the doctors arrived, they bombarded him with questions. "Do you know your name? Do you know the year?" 1922, Paul croaked, his voice raspy and unused. "But I have been away." They thought he was delirious. They told him to rest. They told him he was lucky to be alive. Paul didn't sleep. As soon as he was discharged, as soon as he could hold a pen without his hand shaking uncontrollably, he began to write. He didn't write a novel. He didn't write for fame. He wrote in secret. He bought red, leather-bound notebooks and filled them with a frantic, dense script. He wrote about Andreas Northam. He wrote about the Valley of the Roses. He wrote about the wars of the 21st century and the peace of the 40th. He wrote late into the night, coughing into a handkerchief that came away stained with blood. His tuberculosis was returning, or perhaps it had never left. He knew his time was short. He wasn't writing for the world. He was terrified the world would call him insane. He was writing to purge the memories before they killed him. He was writing to keep the future alive in ink, even as it died in his mind. For years, he kept the diary hidden. He moved to Greece, seeking a warmer climate for his lungs, teaching German to survive. He was a quiet, sad man. His students liked him, but they sensed a deep, impenetrable wall around him, except for one student, Georgios Papachatzis. Georgios saw something in the professor's eyes, a depth that didn't belong to a simple language teacher. One day, sensing the end was near, Paul Dienach called Georgios to his bedside. He reached under his mattress and pulled out a stack of notebooks, roughly 800 pages of handwriting. "Take this," Paul wheezed. "Read it to improve your German. That is all. It is just a story, a fancy of a sick man's mind." He paused, gripping the boy's arm with surprising strength. "But promise me one thing, Georgios. Never publish it. The world is not ready to know what I know." Paul Dienach died shortly after, lonely and obscure in 1924. He took the secret of his journey to the grave, but Georgios didn't burn the diary. He began to translate it. And as he translated, he realized that this was no novel. The details were too precise, the philosophy too advanced, the consistency too perfect. This wasn't fiction. This was a warning and a promise. For decades, the diary circulated only among a secret circle of masons and philosophers. It was suppressed, ridiculed, and hidden. It wasn't until the 1970s that the text finally surfaced for the public. And when it did, it sent shockwaves through the underground. Because Paul didn't just predict vague events. He described a shift in human consciousness that we are beginning to see right now. So, what did he see for us? What is the next step for humanity, according to the man from 3906? Paul wrote that before we reach the Valley of the Roses, we must pass through the Valley of Shadows. He wrote that the 21st century is the crucible. It is the time where we decide if we are a species of war or a species of light. He saw us. He saw you. He saw a generation that would feel lost, disconnected, and anxious. a generation addicted to screens and numbers, but he also saw that underneath the noise, a new awareness is waking up. The Diary of Paul Amadeus Dienach is not just a story about time travel. It is a mirror held up to the future. It asks us the most terrifying question of all. If you knew that humanity eventually creates a paradise, would you have the strength to walk through the fire to get there? Paul Dienach walked that fire. He died alone so that we could know the destination. The future is not set in stone, but the path is visible if you know where to look. Today, the Chronicles of the Future remains one of the most disputed texts in literary history. Skeptics call it the delirium of a dying man, a coping mechanism for a life cut short. Believers call it a prophecy, a roadmap left by a traveler who walked the path before us. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Perhaps the future isn't a fixed point on a map that we are hurtling toward. Perhaps it is a garden that we must tend to, day by day, choice by choice. Paul Dienach didn't just bring back dates and events. He brought back a mirror. He showed us that the darkness of our current age is not the end of the story. It is merely the difficult chapter before the resolution. We are the ancestors of the people of 3906. Their peace depends on our struggle. Their paradise is built on the foundations of our resilience. So I leave you with this final thought. If you were given the chance to fall asleep tonight and wake up 2,000 years from now, leaving everything and everyone you know behind, would you take the leap? Or is the beauty of life found in the struggle of the present? Let me know your choice in the comments below. If you found value in this journey through time, please like this video to help the algorithm find other time travelers and subscribe to the channel for more mysteries that lie on the edge of reality. Until next time, keep looking up.